Hello and welcome back to the Chronicles of Dragonlance podcast, the show where two friends sit and talk about the entire history of Dragonlance, one novel at a time, like a handful of chapters at a time. And if you're listening to this, you know that we have just finished Dragon's Bottom Twilight, which is, one of the greatest starts to a fantasy series you can have. And it was chock full of a billion things and lots of just world building and incredible setup. Honestly, a book that I could just recite from memory. But I thought before we got to Dragons of Winter Night, we would have a very special interregnum podcast. To introduce myself, my name is Shvam, and with me is my co-host, Jonathon. Hi, John.
Hello.
Today, we have two very special guests, probably the specialest possible guests you could get for a Dragonlance podcast, Margaret Weis and Tracy Hickman. Hello, my friends.
Oh, hi, Shvam. Hi, Jonathon.
Hi, Jonathon. Hi, Shvam. Hi, Margaret.
Hi, Tracy.
I don't know if you two know each other, but you've probably written a couple novels together.
Oh, no, we've met.
The famous Hickman sisters? No.
I am the ugly Hickman sister, I just want to point out.
The reason I wanted you two to join me today is, we just read your book, and we're going to be reading, 25 more of your books over the next dozen years or so. And I thought it would be really interesting to have you come on and see if you could remember anything at all about the dawn of time back in 1983, 84-ish, when you were coming up with Dragonlance, or what it was like to go through the process of publishing this novel in a time when fantasy novels were not exactly the hot happening thing on the street. Starting a franchise was not a thing that existed. So, Tracy, I know that you came up with Dragonlance on your way to working at TSR. Is that right?
Yeah, it actually was back in the late 70s, early 80s. Which now I say that, it sounds like, like 1935. But no, my wife and I had been living or trying to live in northern Utah at the time. I'd been fired from my job as a movie theater manager. That's really hard to do.
Yeah,
that was quite an achievement.
You just not show the movies.
I guess management really wasn't my career. But I'd actually been out of work for over a year. My wife and I could not find a job. At the time, it was a very big recession that was going on. Could not find a job. Tried everything I could to get a job. I applied to be a bus driver at the local university. I was one of 500 applicants and came in second.
Goodness. Oh no!
Which there's no gold star for that. And I had just been out of work for over a year. And in fact, my family, myself and my wife, and our then two children, were on church welfare. At the time for subsistence.
Bishop Storehouse,
and I would go in and I would do work for the food allotments that we got, and they assisted us with our rent payments at the time. But my wife had introduced me to Dungeons and Dragons a couple of years earlier, and we had written a couple of adventures with absolutely no concept of how copyright worked at all, and had self-published them and had sold them actually through some game stores. And we had heard that the TSR, the owner of Dungeons and Dragons at the time, would pay like $500.
Whoa!
For an adventure, which to us sounded like all the money in the world. We couldn't actually take our children to church that winter because we could not afford shoes for them.
That's India tears of poverty, man.
It was a very difficult time for us. So in an effort to buy shoes for our children, we sent these adventures into TSR to see if they would buy them. As it turned out, they had already seen them. And for some reason had decided not to sue us, but instead offered us a job.
That's amazing.
And so for my family, my my parents, bless them, they lived in Flagstaff, Arizona at the time. We were in northern Utah, and they called me up on the neighbor's phone since ours had been disconnected. My mother wept. My father begged me not to take this job. He said, "You've failed at everything you've done in your life. If you go back east, I can't afford to bring you back."
Oh no.
So he said, "Come to Flagstaff with your family, live in my basement. I know the owner of the local Sizzler. He can get you a job as a cook." So faced with the option of either crossing the country with my family to work as a game designer or living in my father's basement and working as a fry cook at the Sizzler, for my own reasons.
That choice seems really, really difficult. And I can't imagine what it must have taken, the gumption to say, you know what? I won't live in the basement and cook lobsters all day.
Well, in
Arizona.
And it seems like a ridiculous thing now, but I had my family, I had my wife, I had these children who depended upon me, and one was such a sure thing and seemed like such a reasonable choice. But even beyond that, of course, was the whole idea of saying no to my father.
Yes.
But no, I said, no, we've got to do this. So I packed up what few belongings we had. We put in a moving van and sent it east. My wife and my then two very small children climbed into our Volkswagen Rabbit and started driving across the country. We were actually the first people in my family for several generations to cross the American plains the other way.
In a covered Volkswagen.
In a covered Volkswagen, yes.
No hand carts, thankfully.
No, thank you. Gratefully. And as we were driving across the country, my wife and I have always been partners in everything that we've done. And as we were driving across the country, across the very flat regions of Nebraska, we talked all through the trip about what could we bring to this company that would possibly justify them actually paying us a salary to write games, to do the thing that we loved. And it was there, driving across the plains, heading toward our new job in Lake Geneva, Wisconsin, that the idea of riding dragons into war, the center of Dragonlance, came to be, including the name. We came up with the name as we crossed the country.
I've always wondered about that. Like, where do you get Dragonlance from? Like, how do those two words don't really go together? Even if they're not just something you would immediately stumble upon. Like, where did that come from?
Well, Nebraska's pretty wide. So we certainly had time to come up with it. I don't know. For us, it was just very evocative. We certainly wanted dragons to be a part of it. Because it's so central to fantasy romance, the romance of fantasy, and the idea of a lance. Dragon sword didn't quite feel right. Dragon mace. No, Shining Morning Star was a little long. It just the rhythm of it just felt right.
And I guess, the D&D Dungeon Master Guide had 1,000,001 pole arms to choose from. You could have gone Dragon Glaive Arm.
Oh, yes.
Dragon Bohemian.
Yes, could have. But then we'd have had to have included the weapons versus armor class table.
One of my favorite trivia bits is that when I was in Paris and I got a copy of Autumn Twilight from there, the Dragonlance the logo itself had changed to being Lance Dragon. Right? Like they had flipped it and redone it in that original style because Dragonlance wouldn't make sense, but Lance Dragon is kind of the French grammatical way of saying it. And I was like, I've never seen somebody just change the logo completely. I've never seen any other country do that. I thought it was really cool.
I can remember when Margaret and I first saw the French version of the logo. We thought it looked like the name of a porn star. Let's Dragon.
Lance Dragon.
Oh my goodness. Margaret, how did you find your way to Lake Geneva?
Oh, okay. Let's see. I was living in Independence, Missouri with 2 kids. I was divorced, and I was reading Publishers Weekly and read about this company called TSR that was doing this game called Dungeons and Dragons. And I read about it, and I thought this would be such a cool game to play with my kids because it's all about imagining things. So I found a friend of mine who was a DM, and he came over and ran a game for us, and we had a simply great time. And then a little while later, I was reading Publishers Weekly, and I saw that they had an ad in the back for an editor at TSR, Dungeons and Dragons. And I'm like, wow, that would be such a cool company to work for. And I was kind of looking to get out of Dodge anyway. So I sent a letter, and they said they wrote back and said I had to take a test.
A test?
For the editorial job, which was in the games department.
Huh.
So, so they sent me the test, and I knew nothing about the game.
Oh, no.
Nothing. So I took the test and failed it utterly. Now, my agent at the time, Ray Pinkner, lived in Milwaukee. And he happened to get a call from Gene Black, who was the head of the book department, who asked if he knew anyone who might be interested in coming on board as a book editor. And Ray said, well, as it happens, one of my authors, who is also an editor, actually sent you an application. So Gene went to the games department, found my application, found the test I had failed. And she read it. And of course, working in the book department, you didn't need to know anything about the game. So, and she called Ray and said, I'd really like to meet Margaret. Could she come up for an interview? And I was like, yes. So I flew to Milwaukee. Ray picked me up. And God bless him, I had no money for clothes. Oh, no. And so he bought me a dress for my interview. And I put on my dress and went to my interview. And Gene and I hit it off immediatly.
I'm noticing a common theme of desperation here.
Yes. Yeah, pretty much. That's interesting that both Tracy and I were at low points in our lives when we went to work for TSR. I always found that kind of interesting. So, so Gene offered me the job on the spot.
Wow.
And I said, absolutely, I will take it. So I went back to Independence, packed up 2 kids, and I think we had 3 cats, 2 kids and the cat, and, packed my stuff, I don't even think I had anything to send in a moving van, but we packed my stuff into the car and drove up to Lake Geneva. And as we were driving into town, my son, first place he wanted to go before we even saw our house was the Dungeon Hobby Shop. So I said, okay. So we parked the car, got out, and David looked down, and there on the street was a $20 bill.
Oh,
and so
fate.
David picked it up, and he got to go buy stuff in the Dungeon Hobby Shop.
God.
And he was absolutely
that is so much money in that time.
I know it was. So, I started work and met Tracy, who was already there. And he told me about Dragonlance, and I saw Larry Elmore's amazing concept art, and I met with the game design team, and that was it. I was hooked.
I didn't know that you had written novels before this. Like, what did you write before Dragonlance?
I had written children's books. They weren't novels. They were, my agent got them for me. They were like sixth grade. In sixth grade in Missouri, you studied Missouri history. So I wrote a book about Frank and Jesse James. And then I wrote a book about children during the Holocaust. And I wrote a book about graphic art. I mean, I would basically write whatever anybody paid me to write. Yeah.
I know the feeling. That's incredible. You guys both got very, very lucky, it feels like, because getting a game design job then and now is very hard. And you have to be, I don't know, catch someone's eye at the right moment. So that seems very serendipitous that you two were able to find your ways into the hallowed halls of TSR, Lake Geneva, circa like the
I always said it was being in the right place at the right time, but knowing you were in the right place at the right time. And I think that makes all the difference.
Yeah, because otherwise you're just a Kender wandering instead of being like, hi, I'm where I'm supposed to be.
Mm-hmm.
So when you're there inside like TSR, and Tracy's obviously, I mean, you had to work on things. I know you published like Rahasia and Ravenloft and like some of those other earlier modules. What was the pitch like for Dragonlance? Like, did TSR just immediately sign up for the principle and for the idea?
This is actually one of my favorite stories from the period. When we first came to the company was very, very young. I mean, the average age in the company at the time, I think, was 24 years old.
Oh my goodness!
And
I was in my 30s, and Larry Elmore and Kim Mohan and I and Gene Black were the oldest people in the company.
Oh my God!
and in many ways that energy, you know, of being so young and so stupid. I mean, none of us knew that failure was a possibility. We all just believed it was going to work, and that we'd get away with anything. And in many ways we did. But the company itself was trying very hard to be an adult, okay, which was hard for young people. And so at the time it was very fashionable back in the early 80s, late 70s, early 80s, to hire an outside consulting group. And this outside consulting group, their job would be to come into your company from the outside, take a fresh look at the company and a fresh look at the company's product, and really take it all apart and be able to, you know, advise you, consult with you and advise you as to how your company could be better from an outside perspective. And so it being a fashionable thing to do and sounding like it was an adult thing to do, the company hired a firm from the outside to come and do an analysis of TSR. And I can still remember we were all called together into a meeting, and the creatives at that time were actually down in the Geneva Hotel downtown. We occupied the second and third floors. The building itself leaned slightly toward the street, which is another story altogether. But we all got together for this meeting, and I can remember Penny, I think it was, that read the analysis of the company. And I can still remember that analysis today. Number one, Dungeons and Dragons is your keystone product. Number two, I know. I mean, you know, the blinding logic of this is going to be thunderous for you. But number two, you have lots of dungeons. Number three, you need more dragons.
How much did they pay for this analysis?
Oh, just a lot of money. I mean, compared to our salaries at the time, I'm sure it was astronomical.
Have you thought about adding more ampersands? You have lots of dungeons.
You have lots of ampersands.
But there's
I'm thinking more umlauts would be nice. I mean, it would class up the text quite a bit. So faced with this mandate now to have more dragons, in Dungeons and Dragons, it was just serendipitous that Laura and I had this concept, this product that we wanted to do. Laura and I had already been pioneers in the idea of injecting narrative into role playing, and so we thought, well, wouldn't it be great if we could like do this with this Dragonlance concept? At the time, in the monster manual, there were effectively 12 dragons.
Right.
There were the chromatics, and there were the metallics, and then you had the Tiamat, and so we just didn't. The idea of having like the dragon of the month, right? Let's kill this month. We're going to kill a black dragon, take its stuff. Next week, we're going to kill a yellow dragon, take its stuff. Next month after that, we can look forward to the gold dragon. Rather than do that, we thought, wouldn't it be great if we had this narrative that united all of this, and let us feature the different dragons, certainly as in this product line. And that's how we presented it. That's how we presented it when we wrote it up. Harold Johnson was manager of the game designers at the time, and he and I went to Larry Elmore and told him the idea, pitched the idea to Larry Elmore. Larry was so excited and taken by it that we had a secret meeting in Larry Elmore's basement after work, where Harold and I sat down with the artists and told them what we wanted to present, and asked them if any of them would be willing to just donate time, after work time, to create some art for us so we could sell this thing to the company. And, bless those guys. The artists that we had on staff at TSR at that time all of them were classics. All of them were masters.
Like some of the most legendary names in fantasy art there is.
Yeah. And Larry said, "Oh yeah, I want to do this. Let's do this." And and Keith Parkinson, oh, how I miss him. God. What a brilliant artist. And all of them, they said, yeah, we're going to do this. So Larry created 4 oil paintings that he just really quickly worked up that kind of told the story of Dragonlance as we knew it, as we barely knew it then.
Oil paintings. That is a lot of work. That is like, when you think about that, it's not like just pencil sketches. This is like full on paintings. These take weeks to do. It's crazy to think about. So I, it came time to sell it to the concept to the company, and I, being the one game designer who actually owned a suit and a tie, I took the concept and I went to each of the department heads in the company. To the marketing department, I went to the marketing department head. I went to the head of new projects. I went to all of the different divisions in the company, and spoke to them individually, pitched it individually to them, and got their support before we went into the meeting. Then we went into the meeting, sat down in the meeting with Gary, and everybody was already on board. And when the presentation was finished with all of these beautiful paintings by Larry, and the story had been pitched, and the idea of all of the different ways that we would be monetizing this thing, Gary said, "Yes, this is exactly what we need to be doing. Let's make it happen." And that was the moment when we knew it was actually going to happen. Was at the end of that meeting. So Gary was still in charge of the company at the time?
Gary was still in charge of the company at the time. It actually, as I recall, was just before he left for California.
Mm.
Yeah, because when I got there, he wasn't there. He'd already gone to California.
Yeah. Yeah. It was right on the cusp of that.
And the Blooms were in charge.
Yes, the Blooms were in charge, and then and they were there for a while, and then more
and then TSR got different.
And
quickly.
TSR got different. And it's interesting. Well, it's interesting actually looking back on that, because what we were told at the time is that Dragonlance was considered to be a bridge product. That it was supposed to be the thing that we would be doing until the really big thing came along. And they had a number of game designers who were working on what the next big thing would be, while Dragonlance kind of tided us over. And so it's fascinating to look back on it now, because Dragonlance was the thing that kept the company going.
Right.
It was the next big thing. And the next big thing that they kept looking for just never happened, never came about, never arrived.
After what you said, there are two things I had that came to mind. One of is that one of the things I've always credited you with, Tracy, is that you created the idea of what we call now the railroad adventure, which people sometimes use derisively, but when you created it was a brand new innovation, a brand new idea of, hey, what if we as a group of players go through a story and actually play through this story chapter by chapter and evolve it and grow it and follow this narrative that's been kind of pre-written for us to play through. And it was such a remarkably forward-thinking idea. Like a lot of video games straight up just took that notion from the original Dragonlance modules, like the original Final Fantasy game, the original Dragon Warrior, all these things that evolved into Japanese video games and what modern games are today. Like they all came from your idea of, hey, what if they weren't just disparate dungeons that we linked together? Instead, we had like an actual series. And that's I think one of the greatest innovations that you guys came up with. The other notion that occurred to me is that for all that it's called Dragonlance and for all that it was supposed to be the source of dragon stuff, there's awfully few dragons in Dragonlance. Like Dragonlance is a human story about change and growth and hope and discovery, but there's 10 dragons in it total ever.
Yeah, but they're really good ones.
They're very memorable.
But the dragons, what I liked about Larry's idea for the cover of Dragons of Autumn Twilight was the people were in the front, but the dragon was always in the background.
Yeah.
So the dragon was the menace or in the background. And I thought Larry's artwork just portrayed that, just captured that. I've had so many people come up to me and say, the reason I picked up Dragons of Autumn Twilight, I never heard of it, never heard of Dungeons and Dragons or anything. The reason I picked up that book was because those three characters on the front were looking at me like they wanted me to come with them. And I always thought that was so cool.
I mean, I was never a D&D player. I didn't play D&D until college. And, like I said, I picked up Dragonlance when I was 10, and my dad never played D&D. He picked up the books. I think he was in the Navy at the time, and they were in, some of the airport bookshops. And I think he said it was the covers, right? He had read Lord of the Rings, and he, loved that kind of thing, and he was looking for more. And, here's a ranger and a knight and some sort of barbarian, and in the background there's a dragon. And once he bought them, he went looking for the other ones. And so I think there are a lot of people who enjoy Dragonlance that have very separate from the D&D portion of the game. Yeah,
there's so many people that contributed, and it's important to remember that so much of that in its origin came from the team. The artwork that was developed early on. I can remember coming into work one day, and Larry Elmore running up to me and dragging me over to his easel, to his artboard, and showing me this pen and ink exploded drawing of how Dragonlance is mounted to the saddles on
Yeah, I
dragons.
love that picture.
And he had before he had come to the company, he had worked as a technical artist for the Air Force. And he had done this that the night before on his own time, just because he was moved to do it, just because he wanted to add something to what was going on. And that was so much part of the energy that we had with the people that we worked with. And all of that energy, I think, became part of the success. The Margaret's writing is incredible and accessible and draws people into the world so beautifully, and connects them with the characters so beautifully, and always has and still does. But Larry's covers and even the art design of the cover that was done for that contributed to its success. The individual ink pieces that were at the top of each of the chapters just added that something extra to it. The creation of the map work, which if you look a little too closely at it, you can see the hex lines.
Yeah,
you can see the hexes and the edges of it. And yet those pieces also drew people in and contributed to the
map
success.
is what got me. Seeing the map of Antholon is like, I was like, I need to know, what is this giant like jelly spot in the middle? What is this cataclysm? How is that existing? And I mean, because my friend showed me the Tales of the Lance box set first, and the map of Antholon just like captivated me entirely so much. But talking about the book covers for a moment though, and like I love, for instance, in Winter Night, that Kitiara is covered on that cover, that you don't know her gender, you don't know anything about her, you just see this big dragon high lord staring at you, and you're like, oh no, because I know that was one of the big revelations in the book, and just having that on the cover stay hidden is so impactful and like, draws your attention. When you guys were concepting the idea, did you have this notion of seasons in mind, like autumn, winter, and spring? Because like that tells a story unto itself, and I think it really set the tone for the way the novels were kind of established.
As I recall,
weren't the modules?
Well, there were modules, but they were all using kind of the dragons of.
They have Dragons of Triumph and Dragons of Hope and whatever.
And that was kind of the theme in terms of the adventures. Kind of like Perry Mason and the Case of the Dragon Bone. It was everything was Dragons of for the game titles, but for the books, I remember. I remember visiting Joe Manganiello at his home a few months back, and he was very excited as we were sitting in his game room to bring out some of the things that he'd acquired, and it was kind of a surreal moment for me to like pull out of a plastic bag, zip bag, with gloves on my hands, tractor feed paper that we generated by the ton when we were there, and looking at kind of the faded dot matrix texts, and seeing the original proposal documents.
Man, how does he even find that? I've been looking for this stuff for decades.
and I'm thinking, I'm looking at this, and I'm thinking, I remember this. I remember writing this.
That's wild.
And I'm looking at it, and there are the titles of the books right on the original design documents. So whatever the genus was from that, and I'm not sure where that necessarily came from. I remember it as coming from me, but then I would.
I think so. Because I remember the original. I may have been the one that gave Joe those documents. I can't remember, but anyway, I remember. I remember that. I think you came up with the title.
And I love the idea. Well, my wife and I had been so into narrative and bringing narrative into game. I remember thinking that the titles, I wanted an arc to the titles. I wanted a progression in the titles that said something emotional to us. And the idea of the progression of, autumn twilight, winter night, to spring dawning, the idea of moving through the darkness of winter and coming into the light, felt very compelling to me.
We just started reading Winter's Night, and I said in our very first recording to Shvam, the book is so much darker right from the beginning than Autumn Twilight. It really does embrace the like you said, that arc of, winter. Autumn is a good book and it ends on a highlight, but then it also ends, there's 800 refugees and they're trapped in a thing. And so you can see it starting to happen with Autumn, right? It descends. And then in Winter, I was telling Shvam, I was like, this book starts immediately so much darker. So that arc you were talking about of the seasons is definitely there from Twilight.
Oh yeah, the sun is definitely setting in Autumn.
Yeah. So I think you guys did a great job with that. You mentioned
there's actually a reason for that. Margaret, maybe you could tell them why Autumn Twilight ends on an upbeat note.
Because we didn't think there were going to be any more books.
So you wanted to make sure the readers had something to go away with?
Well, yeah, because the company had decided at that point that that there was only going to be one book, because our distributor at the time, Random House, told them that Autumn Twilight was never going to sell, that nobody had ever heard of these two people, Margaret Weis and Tracy Hickman. And so they should plan on it being only one book. And so we said, well, because the original Autumn Twilight would have encompassed going, I think, to the Dwarven Kingdom.
Yeah. The last part of the modules.
Yes. So it would have gone to the Dwarven Kingdom, but they said that we had to cut that out because it could only be X number of pages, because they wanted to sell it for $2.99, because they didn't think anybody would buy it if it was a higher price than that. And so we had to cut out the Dwarven Kingdom, and we decided to end it with the marriage of Riverwind and Goldmoon, just, end on a high note. And so that was what we did.
I want to jump ahead.
And then,
go ahead.
Yeah.
Well, yeah, I want to jump ahead.
Then in November, it hit the New York Times list. But go ahead.
Yeah, that's a little more important than my thought.
And suddenly, in fact, they wanted another book.
Fancy that.
Yeah.
And not only wanted another book, but wanted it yesterday.
Yeah. It's like, by the way, this goes out in December, so you better be done right now. Well, because I remember that time in Gen Con where I was sitting with you guys and you ended up discussing what became Dragons of Dwarven Depths. And I remember Tracy turning to me and saying, by the way, Shvam, you don't get to say anything about this ever again. And I'm like, well, no, okay, I won't. But I've always been curious.
I said that was our form of an NDA.
Oh, yeah, it was definitely, you looked at me and you're like, if you ever want to talk to us again, your mouth stays shut. And I'm like, yes, man. No, but I've always been curious because I missed the beginning of that conversation. What made you want to go back and tell those like interstitial stories in original Chronicles so much, like 15 years after the fact or whatever it was?
Well, they were just really cool stories, and we'd always felt bad that we didn't get to tell them, because we had had them all plotted out. We knew where they were going. And so it was fun to go back and tell them.
Yeah, I mean,
and I really got to like Kitiara in those. First time I really came to know her was in those books.
Yeah, like I
The
mean,
second one,
for
think.
my money, they're some of the best writing you guys have ever done. Especially like High Lord Skies was just probably my favorite Dragonlance book of all time. Um, so I was obviously very happy to hear of the grand return of Tracy and Margaret to Dragonlance.
We had an interesting conversation actually about when we were going into the Dwarven Depths book.
Mm.
Because as you said, it had been 15 years since we had written the original books. And so Margaret and I had both gone back and we had read the Autumn Twilight again, right? As though it were an introduction or lead in into Dwarven Depths. And Margaret called me up and said, how do we write this? Because we're always trying to improve our craft. We're always trying to get better at what we do. And over the 15 years since we had written the original Autumn Twilight, our craft had improved and changed so much over that period. And so her question was a really excellent artist's question, which was, do we write this book with the voice we used 15 years ago? Or do we write the book with the craft that we have now?
Actually, it turns out it was like 20 years between. But anyways, yeah.
Yeah. And it was an interesting question because we go back and we read Autumn Twilight now, and our understanding of the craft has changed so much since then.
Oh yeah.
But actually the conclusion that we came to was no, we write it with the craft that we have now. And not try to go back, but to,
it would have felt ham-fisted
forward. Yeah.
Because one thing I noticed is as we've been doing this deep dive and reread of Autumn Twilight and Winter Night and such, is that so I'm intimately familiar with your writing. Obviously, I've read every book you guys have ever written. I've read books you haven't published yet, and it's like I've been reading like Margaret and Tracy and your growth through my own growth as a person. Like I started at 12, I'm 42. I've been reading this for most of my life, and just like when I go back and I can see like the youthful kind of energy, but it's also like it's rough, right? It's like it feels like a first novel that has like there's like I'm not saying that there's like incontinuity, but there are sometimes there are things where you guys haven't quite decided what you want to do with the character or a tone or I don't know, a plot point yet, and it's a little wibbly in that story. It obviously gets firmed up later, but you can see like this kind of excitement in it, but it's also it felt a little like you guys were discovering as you wrote, which I know isn't true, but it had that feel to it.
No, actually, I think that is very true. And the reason I think that is true is because no one had written a novel to a game before. It just hadn't happened. And no one knew how that worked, the mechanics of how that worked, the process of how that worked. When we went into the novelization for Dragonlance, we thought of it as a novelization. We thought of it as turning games into story. And so, and many of the adventures had already been written. In fact, I think the first 3 had already been written by the time we began.
I think they were out.
Yeah, some of them were already out. Yeah, that's true. And so we were trying to write novel to the game. And as many people have said since then, you can almost hear the dice rolling in the background as you read the book. We had, for a novel, we had way too many characters all in the same place at the same time. We looked like we were some sort of a tour group following a flag, around. Oh, let's go to Zaxxarath. Everybody would go to Zaxxarath. Well,
you see the miniature moving on the map.
Let's go down here. And we were moving around this huge group of characters, trying to give each one their time and their moment, and to get some introspection here to find out who these characters were. And And so as you go through, as you read Autumn Twilight, you can hear the dice rolling, because we were trying to write to what had been written in the games. What the glorious thing that happened was that we outstripped the games very quickly. By the time they wanted Winter Night to be written, we hadn't written the adventure modules that would go with Winter Night. And so suddenly Margaret and I were free of the constraint. We found that it was much better to write game to novel than it was the other way around. And so when you get into the second book, what happens to the characters? Suddenly we're dealing with smaller, more intimate
well, we split the party. The first thing we did was split the party.
You're never supposed to split the party. You're never supposed to split the party.
Well, I mean, the building fell down. What are you going to do, right?
What you're going to do?
Yes, exactly.
But that's exactly why it happens at the beginning, so that we can start dealing with these characters in terms of narrative arcs that allowed us to concentrate on them and their inner selves, rather than trying to deal with everybody all at the same time.
Yeah.
Now, admittedly, some people got lost in the shuffle.
Poor Riverwind never shows up again.
Yeah, Riverwind kind of he wasn't the worst one. It was who was it, Margaret, that we forgot completely?
Gilthanas?
Elistan.
Oh, Elistan. Yeah, I can't even remember him still.
I forgot Elistan because I didn't like him.
That feels less like forgetting and more like deliberately leaving it. It's funny though, because like
when you look at when you get to the book, you discover this as you get into the next book. Slight spoiler alert
for 1985.
Yeah, for whenever that is. You from 1985. Yes, I was reading along with Margaret's text, and I came back to her and I said, "Where's Elistan?" And she said, he's with the other group. I said, no, he's not. He has to be with this group. He's got to bring the gods back and, establish a religion here. And just, can't we just kill him? I said, no, we really need this. So fine. So now when you read through the text, every now and then, like when they're on the ship going northward, every now and then, Elistan will stick his head out of like a doorway and say, hi, I'm here. Just remember that I'm still here on the boat, okay? And then he closes the door and goes on.
Don't forget, funny? I'm here.
Yeah, what's funny is we were reading the beginning chapters of Winter Night, and there's a section where Tanis and Loran are having a conversation in Thorbarton, and Tanis is deep in his feelings, and Loran's like, stop treating me like a child, etc. And you guys change Elistan's description mid-paragraph from he was an old and wise man to being a young and muscular cleric who's, and obviously we could tell this is Tanis's viewpoint, where he's like, oh, suddenly this man is now a challenge to my masculinity. So now he's young and hot obviously the thing Lorana would be attracted to, instead of being this old, geezer who's been in jail for 6 months. It was one of the funniest, just weird transitions.
Yeah, I think that as I look back on that now and listen to it, I'm going to go crazy and self-justify that. I think that in Tanis's mind's eye, he thought Elistan was probably, a threat to him, because his ego, let's face it, is really, really.
Yeah.
You guys were talking about
how much older. Given how much older Tanis was, Elistan would have been young.
That's true.
Young Papa 60.
Sure, he's got sciatica, but honestly, he's younger than I am.
I've heard that when you guys started, there was an author attached to the novels, and that he didn't last long. And Tracy, you were talking about Margaret's writing and how great it was. Can you talk a little bit about? Is that true? Was there another author attached to the story originally? And
I was hired as a book editor to come on and do and formulate an outline of Dragons of Autumn Twilight that they were going to give to this big name author, fantasy author, who was going to write it. And the only problem was, every time they talked to a big name fantasy author about writing a book for Dungeons and Dragons, they either hung up the phone or they laughed and hung up the phone. And so then they went to mid-list fantasy authors and asked them, and the same thing. And so finally they found one that agreed to do it, and he submitted some sample chapters, and they were really bad. He didn't like Raceland, so you had almost no Raceland. He liked Flint, and so you had a lot of Flint and very little of anybody else. And Tracy and I were reading these, and we said, this is going to fail. This is horrible.
Oh, no.
And so that was when we decided, Tracy and I, that we would write the prologue and the first 5 chapters. And we did that on a weekend.
Wow.
We were so into this that one weekend we wrote the prologue and the first 5 chapters, and we came back Monday and we went to Jean Black, who was the book editor in charge, and we said, Tracy and I think we should be the ones to write this book. And Jean told me later that she really only read them so as not to hurt our feelings. And so Jean set herself up in her cubicle. She actually had a door to hers. None of the rest of us did. And we sat in my cubicle and waited, just to see what she said. And then she came in and she stood in the door and she said, wow. She said, this is what we are looking for. And we're like, yes, we do. So this guy had a 6-month deadline. Well, he'd used up 3 months of it, but we still had to meet the same deadline. So we had 3 months to write Dragons of Autumn Twilight. Yep.
Wow.
That is insane. That is completely unthinkable.
And we had to do it on
and
our
we
own
were
time.
working, yes, because we had to work our day jobs.
How the hell do you write a full novel, 300 pages in 3 months?
100 pages a month.
Yeah, I worked nights, I wrote nights and on the weekends. And then, every morning I'd give what I'd written to Tracy, who'd add his bit, and it would come back to me. And we decided that I would do the final writing so it would have one voice, so you couldn't hear us like coming in and out. And so that's what we did. And we met the deadline.
I just imagine all the paper, right? Because I forget how everything used to be so analog. But
yeah, you have to print all these books.
Print all the papers and pass them back and forth, and all the notes were handwritten and had to be typed up. It's just wow.
It actually is even worse than you remember. Because Margaret and I were working on HP terminals at the time.
Oh no.
Which meant that we didn't actually have a word processor, and we didn't have what you see is what you get. We didn't have a mouse. Everything was line editing. And so you'd write it, and then you would have to go back and do the editing line by finding the line and editing the line in order to fix it. All of which was done based on printouts that were done on tractor feed paper and dot matrix text. So it was hard to read in the first place.
Yeah.
So but such was our mania, and such was our love of the product, the love of the story, and the love of the characters that we wanted to portray.
And then what was worse was then Tracy would handwrite his notes on this dot matrix, and then I couldn't read his handwriting.
Yeah,
I never could.
I'd have to interpret my own handwriting to her. It was pretty sad.
What on earth does this say? And then tearing off the wiffles. I remember, tearing off the wiffles.
Yes.
Nobody remembers that.
which is really funny, because when Joe showed me his piece that still had the wiffles on it,
Yeah.
said,
The wiffles
now
are
be
the
very
little
careful,
strip at
don't
the
you tear those.
sides.
And I'm thinking, dude,
This is all trash, these wiffles.
just
we tore them
trash.
off.
We just throw this away.
So, how much of that original manuscript that you guys handed to Gene Black, or that actually survived in the novel? Like, how
Pretty
much
much
of that
intact, actually.
Wow.
Yeah.
I don't suppose you have a spare copy anywhere.
It might be in my basement. I've got boxes in my basement I need to go through.
Just invite me over one day and I'll just like dig through like a
I'm sure she even volunteers to help.
I'll be there
a lot
tomorrow.
of people volunteering to clear out my basement. I should do something about that.
So, man, 3 months.
So did that author go on to do anything else, or have we never heard of him?
I cannot remember for the life of me what his name was. And so I have no idea whatever happened.
And that author was Stephen King.
Yeah, that was it.
That was it.
You mentioned that he didn't.
It's fun though, because I can still remember them coming to us and saying, "Now you've only got 3 months to write this book. He has to keep all the money, so we can't pay you anything up front."
Yes.
What? That is insane. Are you kidding me?
They were afraid he was going to sue us.
Oh, for God's sake!
So it's all residuals. You guys.
So they said, but we will make up for it with a very small royalty.
Oh,
and I think on after calculating everything out, each of us got on the first deal, each of us got less than 1% of cover price.
Oh my God!
Yeah, that's probably
we each got 0.5%, but. We were the first people at TSR to ever get a royalty. Did you realize that?
Well, that says something about TSR and how they treated their designers, man.
Yeah.
Well, they were all employees.
Yeah. Well, I guess that's
for
true.
hire.
Yeah.
Yeah. You mentioned,
and we were actually doing work for hire, but we did get a small royalty.
You mentioned that the original author didn't like Raceland and he liked Flint. And, we all know that now that Raceland has a whole trilogy about him.
Maybe the most popular character to come out of
one of the most popular character. Did you know then that early that Raceland was going to be that big of a deal because you said he didn't show up as much? Or is this like, I can remember when I went from Chronicles to Legends, I kept asking myself, wait, why are we talking about this wizard? Where's Tanis? Where's Tanis? Because in my mind as a kid, Tanis was the main character, not the wizard. And so, and it was a big surprise to me when everyone's like, no, Raceland's the most important character. And I was like, what? No.
Well, Tasselhoff's the most important character. Yeah.
Well, Raceland was my character. He was the one that I knew from the very beginning. I knew him. Well, it all started with Larry Elmore's painting. And I was sitting in on the design team. We were talking, about Larry's painting. And I said, okay, I need to know, because I was working on the outline we were going to give this other author. And I said, I need to know why Raceland has golden skin and hourglass eyes. And Larry said, because it looks cool. So I thought, well, I can't really put that in the book. Okay. So I thought, cool. Well, it must have something to do with his magic. And what if he had to take a test, like to prove he was going to be a competent wizard? Because the wizards just wouldn't want anybody running around shooting off fireballs. And so they would have to institute some sort of test to make sure that people would obey the laws of magic. And so then what if Raceland got invited to take this test, but what if he had to stake his life on it? Like failure meant death. And how would his overprotective twin brother feel about this? And suddenly I knew the codependent relationship the twins had with each other. I mean, I just knew from Larry's painting and his answer to that question, I knew Raceland.
Wow.
And so that was easy.
Wow, got it.
I mean, one of the things that like it took me to adulthood to really appreciate was just how much depth you managed to get into these characters, especially with terms of like real issues like codependency and drug use and like alcoholism, like Caramon being a drunk because he's trying to fill the hole that his brother leaving has left, or Tanis's identity crisis in the original trilogy and dealing with his own ego and his like having to be the leader when he doesn't want to be the leader and has got this thrust on him because he's the only one who's got any sense of organization. And you guys managed to take these tropes and actually humanize them in a way that like fantasy fiction didn't really do. Like we didn't get inner struggle for like, a lot of these characters or anything like that. You guys actually gave them kind of more than just, I need to get the treasure and kill the dragon, but like actual like human issues that they're trying to solve about themselves.
They very do seem flawed, traumatic characters, which is something you don't always see in epic fantasy.
It's a very modern kind of idea.
Well, we've always felt that heroes shouldn't be made of marble. That hero is kind of an appellation that other people put on you. That your own motivations actually are pretty complicated and often spring from fear and insecurities and being broken somehow. And I think we as a people, when we read story, characters that are broken in some way, somehow we can see how they're broken, helps us to cope with our own brokenness. And this is true, I think, of heroes, and I think it's also true of villains. Nobody is the villain of their own story. The best villains are those who are absolutely convinced of the rightness of their cause. Because they are broken too in a different way. They are broken because they're blind to some part of humanity or to maybe it's to the possibility of hope. But it is in these flaws. It is in the brokenness of the characters, I think, that we find their humanity and can identify with them better. Characters that are flawed, that are dealing with their own brokenness, are characters that we can relate to, and I think are far more helpful to us in our own lives than the marble statues are.
That's a great point. Except for Verminard. If you're born and your parents name you Verminard, you're probably just set up to be a villain.
That's true. But then the question is, why did they name him Verminard?
It's some real bad parenting, I gotta say.
It's interesting. You'd mentioned something just a moment ago that had occurred to me in terms of Raceland, actually, Margaret, and that was, you're looking at this painting that Larry had made, and Larry had put these eyes on the character because it was cool. But one of the wonderful things in Dragonlance is the serendipity that takes place. Yeah, which is joy not only in creation but in creating together. It's one of the things that I really love about working with you, Margaret, is that if I come to you with some crazy idea, or you come to me with some crazy idea, and this has happened over and over in our working relationship, that the response has always been yes, and that it has always been a search for something more interesting, better, with more depth and and finding new creative ways to express. That when you look at Raceland's Eyes and Larry Elmore's painting, it wasn't that, well, change the painting, that's stupid. Instead, it inspired you with this whole range of character that rippled not just in Raceland's character, but ripples out through Karaman and through Tika and the whole codependent set of relationships that are bound up in that. It impacts Tika, it impacts Tanis, it impacts each of the ripples go out and impact each of these characters and make them far more impactful to us and real. That's the beauty, at least for me, it's the beauty in working with people to create something better. And that always, that from my perspective, was how the experience of Dragonlance was. The working with you always made me better. Always inspired better art. And working with Larry and working with with Keith and with all of the artists that were there and all of the game designers and layout people and everybody who touched all of this added to it.
I'm thinking of folks like Jeff Grubb or Doug Niles, who did so much groundwork in Dragonlance in the earliest days. And one thing I've noticed is that you guys put in so much immense world building and depth of story. And when I'm reading these modules, because I've been going back while reading Autumn Twilight to look back at the original to see where you guys went with or differed from the original modules. And man, those are very sparse. Those are 12 pages long and have very tiny amounts of actual text in them. And it's amazing to me that that us gamers were able to make stories and tell giant adventures based on these tiny little pamphlets, and B, that you guys were able to create such a huge world out of nothing. These days, that wouldn't even be the intro chapter of a module, let alone the entirety of the story. It's crazy to me, man. But I think Autumn Twilight still holds up as one of the just best starting, just story starting moments in fantasy, just because of how deep you develop these characters, how much of the story you give us without giving us. Oh yeah, there's war in the north, but then we hear vague rumors, we hear vague mutterings, we get this notion that something is happening, and the creeping slow way that you kind of develop this is so intriguing and clever. And just as a reader and as a writer, I just look at this and I'm like, damn, you guys really nailed it with this one. Yes, maybe you could have had 4 less characters, but just the idea of it felt like there was never a moment. I think maybe the only character I felt I wish I'd gotten more out of was Theros, because it feels like he was there in the very beginning and then you lop his arm off and then he's kind of just stuck. But yeah, I mean,
he had a rough time.
He did not have I wish the silver arm had gotten explained more, but maybe it's just better that we didn't, because we over-explain things way too much. But yeah, man, I don't know. Autumn Twilight is an absolutely delightful novel, and it still holds up. Having now just reread it with much older, more experienced eyes, it's showing me stuff that I didn't even see when I was a child reading it and falling in love with it the first time. I'm like, man, these guys really just needed to sit down and talk. They just needed to have a conversation and work their problems out, and we would be fine.
You just said something I thought was very interesting and that resonates very strongly with me, which is that in rereading Autumn Twilight, you are finding new things in it and discovering new things in the text that had not been there before. The actual text of a novel is really not very much data. I mean, a picture you take with your phone is going to have a file size that is vastly bigger than the text file size of the entire Dragonlance series.
Yeah,
and so the actual information there is very small, but the the sights and the sounds and the smells, the experience and the meaning of the text all takes place in the white space in between the words. Mm-hmm. And that spark is in the reader. It is created by the reader between those words. John Steinbeck said that there are as many books as there are readers, because each reader brings his own experience to the text. Each reader brings his own prejudices, his own viewpoint, his own life to the text, and creates it unique and new. Mm. People have come up to us at conventions very often, and they'll start telling us about our book. And while that seems on the face of it to be kind of a ridiculous sort of thing, what we've come to realize is that what they're telling us is about their performance of our book, about what they created from the words. And each one is unique. Each one is different. Each one is a personal creation experience that takes place between us and the reader, and largely in the reader's experience. Mm. So as we've come to realize this, it wasn't just the artists that created Dragonlance. It wasn't just the process or the product. It wasn't the words that Margaret so brilliantly put on the page. But Dragonlance is created every time someone picks up a book. Mm. Every time someone reads the words, it's created anew. And it's in that act of creation that Dragonlance actually lives for us. And that is a creative act that takes place every day with every reader that joins us, all of us, together on this journey.
When I was in college studying literary analysis and literary criticism, I was taught this notion that there are three things that exist in conversation. There's the text itself, just the words on the page, divorced of context. There's the authorial intent. What did you think when you were writing this book? What was your plan? What was the story you're telling? And then the most important is the reader who is looking at this text and filtering it through the lens of their experience, the way you just said, which is like, the way I read this book as an Indian immigrant growing up in America, first generation born of people who came from another place, living in a city that's not where the people who look like me or act like me are from. I'm looking at Tanis and looking at his, challenges of life as like the immigrant challenge of what does it mean that I live in this society where I'm not here? My people are from somewhere else, and I'm trying to assimilate and create my own found family. That's very different from like the way somebody who is looking at Dragonlance from the perspective of, like my father's an alcoholic and they're dealing with Karaman struggles and stuff, and they're seeing a very different novel than I am. And it is an incredibly skilled art to be able to take these words and give them such a viewpoint such that I can look at it, you can look at it, they can look at it, and we can all see an entirely different picture out of those same words. And I think that's something that you guys did so brilliantly, and capturing lightning in a bottle with the first trilogy and second trilogy, that is very, very hard to replicate. It's very hard. Lots of people have tried, but it's like lenticular design, which is like, the idea of when we were kids, they used to have holograms. Like you would look at one way and you would see like a person's face, and you look at it the other way and it's like a troll. And getting like, if you try to deliberately put that into a text when you're writing, it will fail, because people will see right through you and they'll see like, oh, look, these guys are trying to add different meaning here. It's something that has to come organically through the way you're telling the story. And I mean, the art of a storyteller is one of the most challenging ones through human history, right? Like you got to keep their attention, and you got to make sure everybody feels like this is their story. And you guys killed it.
I just want to add on to that, is that how Shvam talks about how he saw Tanis in one lens as being an immigrant child, being raised up in a devoutly Christian household and living in Southern California. I saw Tanis through a totally different lens, where I saw myself in him where, Tanis talks about his elven heritage and then, the world. And I was like, oh, this is like me at church and then me not at church. And how Tanis is trying to integrate that, or his inability to integrate it, spoke to me, because that's what I saw in Tanis. It's like, that's me. How do I make myself be the same person without destroying who I was, or without disrupting my church life and my outside life? So it's like you said, Shvam, it's just amazing what different people take away, and how you two are able to create characters that allow people to do that.
And the wonderful thing about this for me is that because we have this text in common, because we understand the story of Dragonlance, and we understand the characters of Dragonlance, and the events that they moved through and the thoughts that they had, that I can so much better now understand Shivam's experience. I can so much better now understand Jonathon's experience, even though they're through different lenses, because we have this common language now. And that is for me the beautiful thing in literature, is that not only does it give us help us to find our unique perspective on the text itself, but it unites us in a language where we can now better understand each other because of the commonality that we have in the text. For me, that's a wonderful bridge of communication and understanding that we get through the meaning and subtext of the text.
Cool. Yeah. So we don't want this to be a full day long symposium podcast, because poor John still had to edit this. So, so I really genuinely want to thank both of you for joining us today. This has been an honor and a pleasure. I know we've known each other for like 20 something years now, but every time I talk to you, it's always just the fan of 1988 picking up Autumn Twilight and just being thrilled to death to see his favorite authors here. So thank you so much today. I really, really appreciate it.
Thank you. And if we haven't said so before, Shvam, thank you for all of your help down through the years. You too have contributed to making this work.
Every time I open up Dragons of like Despair or something and I see my name in the back, it's literally like the life goal. I've succeeded in my life quest. I'm going to Gnomish Nirvana. We're done. Wherever Tinker Gnomes go when they succeed. I don't know if anybody's succeeded yet, but that's where I'm at right now, man.
Oh, yeah. Well, thank you for your help. It's been great. And been very good to meet you, Jonathan.
Yeah, it's been a pleasure to have the opportunity and the privilege to talk to you today. So thank you both so much. It was when Shvam told me he wanted to have the interview with you two, and then he was able to confirm that it was happening. First thing I did, I called my dad and I was like, Dad, guess what? And he's like, what? I'm like, I'm getting to talk to Tracy Hickman and Margaret Weis. And he's like, what? And I'm like, yeah, I'm going to talk to them about Dragonlance. Do you have anything you want to ask them? Because, you introduced me to this world. And he's like, well, I don't know. Let me think about it. And so then a couple of days later, he was like, I just can't think of anything to ask him. I don't know.
Well, be sure and tell him we said hi.
I will. And I said, well, I'll make sure that they know that you were a fan and you introduced me to it. So,
oh, that's great.
So, thank you so much.
Thank you to your father for doing so.
Yes.
Yeah.
And as always, my friends, this has been the Chronicles of Dragonlance podcast. Next month, you will hear us embark upon Winter Night, which is one of my favorite novels in this trilogy, definitely. I mean, really, though, is there a Dragonlance that isn't my favorite? I don't know. Yeah. But as always, I've been Shvam. That's been John. You can find us places. Thank you so much, and we will see you next time.